In 1994, Rwanda was in the midst of one of the worst genocides in African history. In 100 days, 800,000 Tutsis and moderate Hutu people had perished in a government-planned extermination. With millions more fleeing from the violence, Rwanda had lost 30% of its entire population. Life expectancy in the country was just 21.9 years. Its already small economy stopped functioning, infrastructure was completely destroyed, and any semblance of a social fabric ceased to exist. Rwanda was a failed state by every conceivable definition. It had become the closest you can get to hell on earth. Today, however, a startling border exists to the north of Lake Kivu. On one side, there are slums chaotically strewn about. Almost no homes have running water or access to electricity. Violent crime and poverty are and have been endemic. For decades, armed rebel groups constantly threaten the livelihoods of those that live there. To get into the country, you'll be forced to pay a bribe, and you'll have to pay even more to leave. Yet just a few meters to the east, across the border, it's almost as if you're on a different planet. Not all streets are tarmacked, but they are astoundingly clean. Drivers follow the speed limit, and police officers never ask for bribes. Economic opportunities permeate the city, and it shows in their neatly built, sturdy homes. Healthcare is cheap and universal, and the homicide rate is even lower than in the United States. But what may surprise you is that this side is Rwanda. Despite what happened in 1994, despite it lacking substantial natural resources, and despite it being the most land-scarce nation on the continent, what has happened in Rwanda in the last 30 years is nothing short of a miracle. By almost every metric, from life expectancy, infant mortality, GDP per capita, violent crime, poverty rates, educational enrollment, and more have substantially improved, while almost all other nations in the region have stagnated or even worsened. But how has Rwanda become so much better off in such a short period of time? And is Rwanda's ongoing economic miracle just too good to be true? For people leaving their second apartment empty, renting it out is an easy way to generate more income. Because in 2022, you can't have all your eggs in one basket, especially since experts predict a typical portfolio heavy on stocks is expected to literally flatline this year. And that's a best case scenario. And with inflation taking 9% of your money straight out of your bank account, people are scrambling for options. But let's take a cue from the world's best investors. Because a groundbreaking Ernst & Young study last year revealed that 8 in 10 ultra-high net worth individuals invest in alternatives, things like real estate, gold, and private equity. But B&A's CIO recommends investing in one specific high-performing alternative to rescue your cash: fine art. 2/3 of millionaires already hedge against inflation with art, according to UBS. Because the last time inflation was this high, art appreciated by an unprecedented 33.2% annually. And with Masterworks, diversifying your portfolio with paintings from legends like Picasso and Banksy only takes a few clicks. But the best part? It doesn't take millions of dollars either. Actually, I take that back. The best part is that Masterworks has delivered an unbelievable 25% net returns for the last 4 years in a row, through COVID, a bear market, and scathing inflation. Past performance is no guarantee of future results, but they've done so well that there's a line of people waiting to be let onto the platform. So use my link in the description to skip the waitlist and get started today. Thank you, Masterworks, for sponsoring this video. The original inhabitants of the African Great Lakes region were the Hutu and to a lesser extent the Twa people. While fiercely debated today, it's speculated that in the 1500s the Tutsi people migrated from the Horn of Africa. These Tutsi, along with their cattle, which was the primary source of wealth in the region, slowly came to militarily and economically dominate the area. By the 1700s, the Tutsi, who only made up about 15% of the population, had established a highly militarized and centralized kingdom, and the vast percentage of wealth, power, and resources started to accumulate to the minority Tutsi population. Eventually, the kingdom was colonized by first the Germans and then the Belgians after the First World War. Seeing as directly ruling over a colony in the heart of Africa was expensive, the Belgians decided to ally themselves with the existing Tutsi-dominated power structure. The Tutsis would retain their privileged position in society in return for funneling resources from the Hutu to the Belgians. Along with forcing the population to carry identification cards marked Hutu, Tutsi, or Twa, the Belgians had exacerbated the power gap between the groups, and this led to a rapidly growing resentment against the privileged Tutsis. The Hutus, by contrast, were relegated to heavy taxes and forced unpaid labor. Wanting to make the colony more profitable, the Belgians also introduced coffee, which quickly came to dominate the economy and led to even harsher treatment of the Hutus. But this structure didn't last long. Out of fear that the Hutus, with their vastly superior numbers, would eventually rise up in rebellion, the Belgians started a transition toward favoring the majority Hutu. This transition, along with the death and possible assassination of the king and centuries of oppression at the hands of the Tutsi, allowed for a massive rise in anti-Tutsi violence. The first wave of violence came in 1959, in which an estimated 150,000 Tutsis fled Rwanda to neighboring countries. The rise in Hutu power, along with anti-colonial sentiments, culminated in independence in 1962. With Hutus now in control, they reversed the system, now institutionalizing discrimination against the Tutsi, and occasionally carrying out systematic violence against them. Over decades, millions of Tutsi refugees would flee the country. Despite this, Rwanda would experience sustained economic growth due to generous amounts of external aid, favorable trade deals, and most importantly, a large rise in international coffee prices. With this economic growth came rapid population growth. Rwanda was already the most densely populated African nation, and therefore land became ever more scarce, which was a major problem since most of the population only ate what they grew on their individual plots of land. And like most nations that become too reliant on a single export, the plunge in coffee prices in the late 80s sent shockwaves across the Rwandan economy. To make matters even worse, Rwanda's agricultural land was starting to show signs of heavy deterioration due to excess cultivation. If that was not enough, a significant drought occurred in 1988 and 1989. Rwanda had too many mouths to feed, their farmlands had become unproductive, and because of low coffee prices, the government did not have the resources to step in and help. That government, which by now was a totalitarian one-party state that had grown ever more tyrannical, corrupt, and inefficient, started to use the Tutsis as a scapegoat to their mounting issues. One of Paul Kagame's earliest memories was him and his family narrowly escaping death during one of the outbreaks of violence against the Tutsis. They would successfully flee Rwanda, living amongst hundreds of thousands of other refugees in southern Uganda. While there, Kagame rose the ranks of the military, eventually becoming a senior officer before helping to overthrow the Ugandan government in a military coup. He would go on to join and eventually lead the Rwandan Patriotic Front, or RPF, which was a militant global network of Tutsi refugees who had the goal of returning back to their country. The RPF was a streamlined, highly competent, and experienced fighting force. The deteriorating situation in Rwanda and the sustained human rights abuses against the Tutsis provided the perfect timing to launch their plans. In October 1990, they invaded Rwanda. While initially successful, a prolonged stalemate eventually led to a shaky peace settlement in 1993. This came to an end when a private jet carrying the president of Rwanda was shot down in April 1994. What happened next can only be described as hell on earth. In the years prior, the Rwandan government had secretly been arming militant groups and locating all Tutsi households, during which vicious anti-Tutsi propaganda had been broadcasting with increasing frequency. The government had been planning for an extermination of the Tutsi population, and the downing of the president's plane was the catalyst for it to commence. Over the next 100 days, 800,000 Tutsis and moderate Hutus were murdered. Instantly, Kagame and the RPF resumed their fighting, and the killings did not cease until they captured the capital of Kigali. When the RPF took control of Rwanda, it was hardly a nation. 77% of all Tutsis were gone, the rest were forever traumatized. Millions of Hutus fled in fear the RPF would take revenge. In sum total, Rwanda had lost approximately a third of its entire population. Nearly all infrastructure was destroyed, the economy was barely producing much of anything, and the extreme social resentment remained. How do you possibly rebuild such a failed state that was widely regarded by the international community as an irreparable nation? In the immediate aftermath, the RPF did three things. The first was the rapid establishment of a temporary government, headed by RPF leaders. The government that would coalesce would largely resemble that of the original fighting force. It was highly transparent, efficient, and structured to fight against corruption. Its aim was to stabilize, rectify, unify and create a nation free of ethnic labels. The second objective was to stop further violence by using the military as police and imprisoning as many of the perpetrators as possible. In a country of now 6 million, 120,000 were in prison. Seeing as it would be impossible to give each prisoner a proper trial, Rwanda had to resort to a traditional justice system in which local courts, judged by elders, would quickly process trials. It's unknown just how fair the trials were, but Rwanda's lack of resources meant it did not have another option. Those that actively planned the atrocities were tried in an international criminal tribunal. The third objective was to accept help from the world that had neglected Rwanda. Due to a lack of political appetite after failing to secure peace in Somalia, the UN did almost nothing to stop the atrocities. In the aftermath, out of guilt, the UN and many nations individually poured massive amounts of resources into Rwanda. Approximately $700 million of humanitarian aid was sent in the first year after the conflict. With this aid, infrastructure was rebuilt, healthcare facilities were restored, and schools opened once again. While still in poor shape, by the year 2000, the situation in Rwanda had stabilized and was gradually improving. While Paul Kagame states he originally had no political aspirations, he became vice president of the temporary government and controlled the national army. When then-President Bizimungu was forced to resign after falling out with the RPF in 2000, Kagame would take his place. In that same year, Rwanda would set in stone its Vision 2020 that would outline its plans for rapid development, with the goal of becoming a middle-income country in just 2 decades. Rwanda's Vision 2020 was based on 6 key priorities, including good governance, international integration, and the rapid development of the private sector, infrastructure, human resources, and agriculture. But the unwritten key priority was making sure the nation did not break out into violence once again, even if that meant controlling the nation with an iron fist. By 2003, a new constitution and permanent government was established, with Kagame winning the first election. But Rwanda is not democratic. Provisions of the constitution effectively turned Rwanda into a one-party state. Political opponents are banned from running in elections, jailed, or even murdered. Free speech was stamped out, and basic tenets of democracy were never established. While not absolute, after 1994, Rwanda has been largely controlled and administered once again by the Tutsi minority. And with that fact, Kagame and the RPF knew the only way they could build and maintain political legitimacy was through providing security and rapid economic growth, while making sure any voices of dissent were silenced. Rwanda's unique situation and history therefore necessitated and heavily motivated those in charge to establish corrupt-free, transparent, and effective governance, to which rapid economic development could then take place. With Kagame in charge, they did just that. Today, Rwanda is the second least corrupt nation in Africa, just behind Botswana, and even ahead of some European nations like Italy and Greece. While not perfect in the context of its region, Rwanda's lack of corruption has given it a significant advantage. This in turn has created a positive feedback loop when it pertains to foreign aid. Rwanda receives aid which is used effectively, to which nations are then more willing to continue supplying. With this, the Rwandan economic miracle was born. Rwanda, lacking any substantial natural resources, followed in Singapore's footsteps. Kagame knew the most valuable resource Rwanda had was its people. When he took office, the average life expectancy was just 47.2 years. Access to healthcare was low and of poor quality. Therefore, Kagame focused a large percentage of aid to improving the healthcare system, which in theory would provide a more productive workforce. Large undertakings have managed to build modern hospitals and local clinics all over the country. Extensive work and funding has gone into training new doctors and nurses, bringing back healthcare workers who fled the nation in 1994, and incentivizing foreign doctors from all over the world to help train, manage, and further increase the medical knowledge of the nation. To ensure medical coverage is distributed, all Rwandans can be fully insured for just $2 a day. Those that cannot afford this get free service. All of these efforts have dramatically increased the availability and quality of healthcare services, and has resulted in life expectancy increasing to 70 years today. The second approach to investing in the nation's people came in the form of educational improvements. To do this, Rwanda has allocated 30% of its entire budget to education, which represents its largest share of government expenditure. Much like healthcare, a heavy focus was made in training as many teachers as possible, utilizing humanitarian organizations to help build schools, and eventually implementing a 12-year mandatory education. From less than 50% in 2000, today, Rwanda has a 98% enrollment rate in basic education. Furthermore, Rwanda has recently been pivoting its priority to building technical schools in hopes of eventually becoming a hub for information and communication technology in Africa. But one of the most important factors for Rwanda's success is its police force. While initially they were inefficient and untrusted, major reforms transformed it into one of the strongest institutions. Training was increased for officers with a focus on human rights, and institutions became subject to external oversight by 7 other governmental and civilian committees. Later reforms required the police force to work in conjunction with their communities by frequently broadcasting their objectives, setting up toll-free anonymous phone lines, and actively asking the community for information on how to better prevent crime. As a result, Rwanda has some of the lowest crime rates in Africa. In fact, according to a 2018 Gallup poll, Rwanda ranks in second place for law and order in Africa. The growing safety and increases in access to healthcare and education proved to be the perfect foundation for which the government was able to implement policies to unlock Rwanda's economic potential. The government put a heavy focus on infrastructure to spur growth, including the building of road networks to connect the country, constructing large hydropower plants to finally bring electricity to households and industries, and critically, they invested in Kagame Airport. With Rwanda being landlocked, it was crucial that it enhanced its connection to the world through air travel and cargo shipments. The government also invested in a $95 million, 2,300-kilometer telecommunications network. This has resulted in Rwanda being ranked 3rd in Africa for internet connectivity. The transportation infrastructure significantly decreased Rwanda's transportation costs, making exports much more competitive. As a result, and in conjunction with a concerted effort to transform the productivity of the agricultural sector, profits and thus wages have improved for the poorest in the nation, who disproportionately work in agriculture. However, Rwanda has gotten quite lucky in that the price for their most important export, coffee, has substantially increased since 2001. But Rwanda did not want to be reliant on the coffee industry forever. In order to diversify in more profitable markets, Rwanda has made major progress in increasing how attractive it is to foreign investment. Since 1994, tariffs on exports were slashed, taxes reduced, and the process to start a new business or operate in the country has been streamlined. Unnecessary regulations were done away with, and laws regarding enforcing business contracts were strengthened. Rwanda improved its business environment so much that according to the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business Index, Rwanda was the most improved nation in the world, moving from 142nd place in 2008 to 29th in 2019. This ranks it 2nd in Africa and even ahead of more advanced economies like Japan, the Netherlands, and Switzerland. This in turn has spurred a huge rise in foreign investment, from just $8 million in 2005 to $366 million in 2018. This foreign investment, combined with Rwanda becoming much safer, contributed to a substantial increase in growth in all sectors, but specifically in tourism, which today has become the primary source of foreign capital. The revenue generated from tourism has increased from $27 million in 2000 to $635 million in 2019. The service sector, which includes tourism, along with banking, retail, hotels, transportation, communication, and other basic services, has been the fastest growing sector, helping to diversify the economy and bring higher-paying jobs. Yet one of the most debated pieces of Rwanda's economic development has been the establishment of state-owned enterprise. Crystal Ventures, the RPF's holding company, has a huge hold on the economy. They have investments from telecommunications, milk processing, road building, fancy coffee shops, and luxury estate. Horizon is another large holding company that is controlled by the Ministry of Defense that works in logistics and construction. Proponents argue these companies help to funnel resources into longer-term projects, acting as an icebreaker to markets that the private sector and foreign investors shy away from. This included the successful establishment of a mobile phone network in 1998 that many thought was impossible. However, critics argue these companies get preferential government contracts that prop up loss-making ventures and inefficiencies. But the real problem is the intersection of commercial and political power in finding the right time to allow the private sector to take over. These large conglomerates have been useful in making business where no business was to be found. However, it appears they are increasingly becoming obsolete, economically inefficient, and potentially politically dangerous in the future. Nevertheless, they have been important to Rwanda's development thus far. The focus on increasing human capital, investing in infrastructure, and making Rwanda an attractive destination for foreign capital has resulted in some astounding results. Since 2000, Rwanda has averaged a GDP growth of over 8%, representing a five-fold increase in total economic output, making it one of the fastest-growing economies in the world. The average Rwandan is much healthier, richer, and educated than ever before. The nation is no longer food insecure, and citizens no longer need to worry about violence and crime. But it's not all perfect. Despite its growth, Rwanda is still a poor nation. 70% of its population still only eats what they grow, and economic opportunities are still limited. There are even some that think the government has been fudging the numbers, and there is speculation that Rwanda has been illegally plundering resources from the Congo. On top of this, Rwanda's economic miracle has come at a risk. Since 2000, Kagame has ruled the nation with an iron fist. While this style of governing was a necessity to bring Rwanda back from ruins, today it appears to be risking its very future. There is still ethnic tension, which may be building up to dangerous levels due to the government's efforts to stifle free speech and political freedom. Over the last 20 years, Rwandans have put up with the lack of political freedom because the government has provided security and rapid development. Should this fail to continue, the nation could erupt into violence once again. While Rwanda appears poised to be a middle-income country in 2035 and possibly even a rich country in 2050, its real test will come when it eventually experiences life after Kagame. The totalitarian nature of the government could easily be used to enrich the elite at the expense of the people. Should someone less benevolent come into power, this surely will be the result. Rwanda's government should seek to pivot toward a style of governance like Botswana, which I have a video on, because democracy will ensure continued political stability. Yet this appears unlikely, because the Tutsis in charge are terrified of relinquishing power. Nevertheless, for the current moment, Rwanda appears to be one of the few African success stories.